The name ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, actually helps contribute to the misunderstanding of the condition. Because if you look at the name, attention and hyperactivity, one would logically stand to reason that that is the core feature of this condition. If a person has ADHD, the symptoms need to occur across all areas. It's not selective. If it is selective, if it's just occurring in school but not in other areas, it's most likely not ADHD.
Welcome to the Be Better broadcast. Today, we are talking all about the truth about ADHD and what it is you can do about it. And to do that, we have a very special guest. We have the husband of Eran Grayson, who we had on the show last year, at the very beginning of last year. And she's like, you got to meet my husband, Eran. He is phenomenal at what he does. He's a thought leader when it comes to ADHD. And I want to talk to him about his story as well as what is ADHD? How can you take this information if you have ADHD or people in your life have ADHD, so you can help them better understand themselves and so that you can understand them better as well. And for those who don't know Eran Grayson is an ADHD expert and the founder and CEO of Grayson Executive Learning. Eran believes that ADHD is widely misunderstood, and it is his mission to debunk the harmful myth that individuals with ADHD are lazy or do not care. He is frequently sought by students, busy professionals, entrepreneurs, and small business owners for his vast knowledge in helping individuals with ADHD to improve their time management and their productivity, as well as to break through the obstacles that are getting in their way of success. And I know society is one of those large obstacles, and we're going to talk about that as well. So when you take away even just one insight or strategy or something new that made you think from this conversation with Eran, all that we ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. You are the reason the broadcast has grown the way it's grown over the past 3 years, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. So without further ado, Eran, all the way from Dallas, it's great to have you here, brother. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much. I'm glad to be here.
It's a long time coming, man. It's a long time coming. Eran connected us. She's like, you got to talk to Eran. We connected months ago, actually.
We did.
And then we got you scheduled, and I was checking out everything you do, and it's great that you do what you do. It's helpful to the world that you do what you do. You're making a big difference. I know specifically you worked with entrepreneurs, like we were talking about one-on-one, and now you're helping high school students and college students. And who needs this more than high school and college students, even middle school students, right? Because we're in a world now, and I'm sure you were going to mention this, we're in a world, a greatly overstimulated world, right? And I believe ADD, ADHD was different when I was growing up than it is now. I believe it was perceived differently. People were on medications for it, right? And I think that now, if you look at everybody, all these kids growing up with cell phones and TVs in every room and VR and all these other things that are coming out, this world of instant gratification and notifications, it seems as if everybody has ADHD, but including myself at times. But I'd like to ask you first, what is ADHD? How do you define it? What is it really?
Sure. So, it's interesting. There are a lot of misconceptions about exactly what ADHD is. And a lot of these misconceptions are, they're born from inaccurate portrayals of the condition on social media. And no shot at you, brother, but the idea that everyone has a little bit of ADHD is, by the way, it's a very common idea, very, very common. And we frequently find that on social media because, everyone feels, or not everyone, but so many people feel that they are distracted, easily distracted, or their peers are distracted, largely because of cell phones. Our attention spans seem to be decreasing. Our a difficulty with impulse control, with checking our phones, with checking our email. We're always multitasking, doing multiple things. So it feels like there is ADHD amongst everyone. But ADHD is actually, it's a very complex disorder. So what is ADHD? ADHD is actually a disorder of executive function. So, what are executive function? Executive function refers to processes occurring in the brain that are instrumental in day-to-day living and making decisions. Specifically, executive functions regulate our ability to focus, to pay attention, to control our impulses, to plan ahead, and thus to manage time. And so, what's important to understand about executive function is that they are self regulatory in nature. So, what do I mean by self regulatory? It means that an individual exercises self control in regards to these processes. So, take, for example, attention. Right now, you and I are having a conversation. I'm on this podcast. I am consciously directing my attention towards you. There are birds, for example, outside my office chirping. And if I did not direct my attention at you, my attention could wander off and, look at the birds or concentrate on them. Or maybe it would wander off and think about, what am I going to have for dinner later this evening? So that's one example. Another example would be executive functions regulate our impulse control. So let's say, for example, I was anticipating an important email. Because I'm on this podcast and I'm prioritizing speaking to you, I am resisting my impulse to check email and see if I received this important email. But if I was to struggle to exercise control of my impulses, then you'd probably see me picking up my phone frequently. So this idea of self-regulation is key to ADHD. Now, someone might be listening to this and think to themselves, well, obviously, you are exercising self-control over your attention and over your impulses. I mean, who would be exercising control over them if not you? And there lies the crux of ADHD. It is a condition of difficulty with regulating self-control. So then what happens? We have an individual who has ADHD struggles with exercising self-control over their attention and focus. So their mind frequently wanders. They struggle with exercising self-control over their impulses. So we find individuals who have difficulty with delayed gratification, and oftentimes leading to risky behavior. We have individuals that struggle to regulate themselves with respect to planning ahead. So we find these individuals oftentimes just living in the moment. They seem to perpetually be unprepared and behind the curve. And so the idea that individuals with ADHD are lazy or that they don't care, I can understand why someone would arrive at that conclusion, but it's misguided. It's not that the individual with ADHD is lazy. It's that they are struggling to regulate themselves to engage in things that society views as important, such as productivity. So what we find is with students, for example, we'll have a student who, because of difficulty with regulating their attention, especially in classes that they find the content matter to be boring or not stimulating, they daydream a lot. And so we'll have gaps in knowledge, and therefore they perform poorly on tests. Due to difficulties with impulse control, we'll find them to engage in chronic procrastination. And therefore, they might not, they'll have a string of missing assignments or late work. Net result is this student underperforms in school. And so you will look at this track record of underperformance. And if you don't understand that this result of underperformance is due to self-regulation issues, one might think, well, you're lazy. You don't do your work because you're lazy. And since I've had so many conversations with you about this, you haven't made any changes, and therefore you probably just don't care. And that is inaccurate. So if your listeners, particularly parents of students or children with ADHD, or you're an educator and you have students in your classroom who have ADHD, I want you to appreciate that the lack of follow through, consistency with your students who have ADHD is not due to them being lazy or not caring. It is largely due to a difficulty of the student with regulating themselves with respect to their attention, their focus, their impulse control, their ability to plan ahead, to manage time, and other areas of executive function. That's what is actually happening.
So, okay. So, and thank you, by the way, for giving that very thorough explanation. It was very well said. And I have questions with specific pieces of it.
Sure.
But let's talk to the teacher in the classroom who, and this is important for the parent. This is also important for the manager or the leader at work. You've got the person in your classroom or on your team who others may perceive as lazy. They're late, they're disorganized, their productivity suffered, they procrastinate, all these things that you've mentioned. How do you know when it's ADHD versus simply just not showing up, right? How do you know it's ADHD if this person hasn't gone to a specialist and has been told you have ADHD?
Sure. So, by the way, the only way to actually know is for an individual to be assessed. And so that is the only way to know. Now, you don't need to have a degree in psychology in order to have suspicions that an individual has ADHD. But I would encourage educators who suspect that a student has ADHD to have a conversation with the student's parent and encourage them to get an evaluation, an ADHD evaluation, or to just simply have them assessed. And the way a diagnosis of ADHD occurs is through an assessment process. There is no single test, be it a physical, medical, or genetic test, to identify ADHD. So typically the way this process works is an individual goes to a qualified mental health professional, and that individual will gather both historical and current data on the individual's functioning, specifically when were the onset of symptoms, and these symptoms being the difficulty with attention, concentration, time management, not being able to meet standards or expectations. When did they occur? What is the severity of them, and in what settings do they occur? For example, does it just occur in school, or does it occur at home, at school? And if this is an adult, and does it also occur at work? Because if a person has ADHD, the symptoms need to occur across all areas. It's not selective. If it is selective, if it's just occurring in school but not in other areas, it's most likely not ADHD. But so the evaluator will take a look at, again, the functioning, historical and current. They will likely also ask the people who know the individual who's being assessed. They'll ask them to fill out standardized behavior rating scales. The assessor will then compile all of this information and compare it to the diagnostic criteria for ADHD that's found in the DSM-5, which is the authoritative handbook for mental health professionals to diagnose mental health disorders. And that is how they may arrive at an ADHD diagnosis. And the reason why I recommend parents to get a proper evaluation is because ADHD shares symptoms with other disorders, namely anxiety and to some degree depression as well. And it's important to get this right because treating ADHD is different than treating anxiety, and it's different than treating depression. So if a person is serious about effective treatment, you need to get a proper diagnosis. I'll also say this: some of your listeners will think, I actually never went through a full evaluation process. My mom took me to my primary care physician, and they asked me how I was doing in school. I shared with them, and then they just prescribed me a medication and a diagnosis. Yes, that does happen, but again, I discourage going that approach because, again, what could appear on the surface to be ADHD could be another condition, and different conditions are treated differently.
Yeah. If we think practically what's happening out there, are people going to accredited mental health physicians most of the time for this sort of thing, I can only imagine that the answer to that question is no. I can only imagine most are going to their primary care physician who has 10 minutes in their time slot to see your son or your daughter. And they're like, yep, ADHD, take this medication, right? And now they're on this medication, and who knows, maybe it was anxiety, maybe it was depression, maybe it wasn't something that this medication is actually going to help with. And now this is a perpetual thing that is cycling through your life. And you're always wondering, I'm different. Is something wrong with me? All these things. So let me ask you, I'm assuming, because you didn't mention that, you didn't say this yet. Were you diagnosed with ADHD yourself?
No, I don't. I don't have ADHD. My executive function are quite intact, and which is a little unusual that someone with my profile would gravitate towards serving a population that is in many ways quite different than myself. In terms of, actually, in many ways, I have such an appreciation for individuals who have ADHD, by the way, because there are strengths to having ADHD. There are some very significant challenges with having ADHD, and they need to be respected. But there can be frequently significant strengths. And those strengths are people with ADHD they're not linear thinkers. They do not see the world through the same lens as individuals who are neurotypical. By the way, neurotypical means an individual who does not have ADHD or diagnosed mental health condition. So what I love about working with individuals with ADHD, first of all, they're frequently just super smart. And something that I want your listeners to know is ADHD exists entirely separate from intelligence. So you could have a person who is incredibly smart and has ADHD, and someone who is on the opposite spectrum of intelligence, and they too can have ADHD. So ADHD and intelligence, they exist entirely separate from one another. And individuals with ADHD are very often very, very intelligent. So that's an enjoyable thing. The other thing is they just see things differently. They can often be incredible problem solvers because they just look at problems and they see the world differently. They oftentimes have a lot of energy, which they're able to carry into their work. And they are also very frequently prone to be creative, and which is why people with ADHD are highly overrepresented amongst entrepreneurs. Many entrepreneurs actually have ADHD. So again, love working with this population, but myself, I do not have ADHD, and my executive function are quite intact.
Very interesting. Okay, so I was just curious. I thought this would be more, and I'm very wrong. So I looked up how many people in the world have ADHD or diagnosed with. And from this Golden Steps ABA resource I found on Google, I'm not sure how reputable they are, but they say ADHD is estimated to affect around 5% of children and 2.5% of adults worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. This is very interesting, though. Maybe you'll have some insight on this, Eran. Why is it 5% of children, but only 2.5% of adults? Is it something that disappears in time for some people? Why would it be less adults and more children? Do you have any idea?
I do. So I have a couple of takes on this. So the estimates for ADHD, the prevalence of ADHD, it can vary widely, anywhere as low as 5% of children to upwards of 9%. And I don't have any strong opinions on either or, but in reference to your question, so ADHD is not something that people grow out of. It is something that for some individuals, they just simply learn to manage very well. So they develop compensatory strategies. The reason why I said earlier, when a assessor does a diagnostic to determine whether or not ADHD, is present in an individual. They're going to ask when were the onset of symptoms. ADHD, a person is born with ADHD and they have it for a lifetime. There's no cure for ADHD, but people can learn to manage it effectively. So essentially what you're seeing with that statistic is when that number is much lower for adults, what is likely happening is that the adult has learned to effectively manage their ADHD symptoms such that it no longer meets a diagnostic threshold. So that's what's really going on in that statistic.
Very interesting. And I was also curious, where did this term even come from? And I'll share this too. Let's see if I'm sharing the right thing here. Doesn't look like it. Well, anyways, I'll just read it. So I looked up, where did ADHD come from? And it says ADHD was first mentioned in 1902. British pediatrician Sir George Frederick Still described it as an abnormal defect of moral control in children. He found that some affected children could not control their behavior the way a typical child would, but they were still intelligent. Let me tell you something, man. And this at the beginning, I love that you did, by the way. And you're like, not everyone has this, right? And I know that's a large understanding, but let me tell you, I'm a weirdo at times, a lot of the times. Okay. And when I say that, like I do a lot of things that a lot of other people wouldn't do, at least in public. Right.
Okay.
And I accept that I'm different. And I believe that my differences aid in the show and in doing what I'm doing. Who knows? Maybe I'm ADHD. I don't know. I've never been diagnosed for it. Like you were describing it at the very beginning and you said, I'm focusing on you right now, this podcast, but I could look outside. I could listen to the birds. I could be checking my phone for this important email. Let me tell you, man, I am frequently distracted with birds outside. I've been on the podcast. I haven't done it in this podcast, which is a testament to you, but I've checked my email a lot in podcasts. Not every time, but at times I'll just be like, my hands want to do something and I'll look over and I'll look at this and I'll come back and you would never know. Sure. Right. So, and that's me admitting that.
Fair.
I'm a distracted person. And when I am focused, I'm able to focus for very long periods of time, right? Just to attack something and get it done. If there's a project I want to get done, I'm laser focused on it. But otherwise, unless I have that intentionality, which may be a strategy for that because I want to ask you, what are the strategies in order to best manage this? When I look at where this came from, it came from 1902, where this random man who had Sir in front of his name, so that gives him credibility, came up with this phrase ADHD that we've continued from the early 1900s until today. We look at the history where he described it as an abnormal defect of moral control in children. Who knows what that even means? Maybe it was a child not respecting their elder, saying something they shouldn't have said. So my question, I'm curious to see where you take this.
Sure.
Is ADHD simply a construct that's still created and going through time to explain people who are simply different? Or is it truly a medical diagnosis? Is it a real thing? And I mean, no disrespect by that question, but I'm curious to see where you take it.
Sure. So it's interesting that you bring up the origin of the disorder, because the name ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, actually helps contribute to the misunderstanding of the condition. Because if you look at the name, attention and hyperactivity, one would logically stand to reason that that is the core feature of this condition. And it's not. It's just a component of it. And so I don't fault somebody for reducing or minimizing this condition to just attention and hyperactivity, which, by the way, the hyperactivity piece is mostly present in children. And it's really a function of impulse control or challenges with impulse control. And what we find, that is one thing that if you might say, do adults grow out of, it would be the hyperactivity part. And we just, as a child grows older and matures, we then more see it as challenges with impulse control, and not the kind of impulse control necessarily of bouncing off the walls, but for example, the checking a phone, the maybe impulse control, impulse buys, impulse purchases, impulsive decision making. We see that in adults. But ADHD is a disorder of self-regulation. And one of the issues I take when adults, namely educators or parents, accuse children of being lazy and not caring,
Mhm.
they're essentially accusing them of having moral failures,
Well, when
moral
an
failing.
adult says that, this child's lazy, my child lazy, honestly, that's a failure on the adult for not learning to better understand their child and help them to learn and do the way that they must learn and do. It's almost an easy out for the adult to say that their child is lazy, in my opinion.
So and I wouldn't necessarily see it that way. I would see it as an adult who's uneducated
Okay, sure.
on
Absolutely.
on a condition, and it's certainly not a moral failure of the child. Because again, if I have an inherent challenge with regulating my attention, then is it fair to blame me if my mind wanders because you're teaching me something that's not of interest to me? So
Yes.
it's not a moral failure. It's just my inability to be able to control my attention and focus on something that's not of interest to me. So again, I wanted to touch on those things. You mentioned the origin of ADHD. And I wanted to address that. The other thing is you were talking about you're oftentimes easily distracted, but then you are also able to just focus and zone in. And that is another feature of ADHD. It's called hyperfocus. And
Interesting.
hyperfocus is just that. You have an individual is able to with ADHD is able to focus for extended periods of time. Typically, it's on something that they find very interesting, very engaging. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why a lot of parents struggle to wrap their head around that their child has an attention challenge. Because what they'll say, you'll have a parent will say, this thing that my child is unable to focus is complete nonsense. They're able to play video games for 8 hours straight. I could never do anything for 8 hours straight. You can't tell me my child can't focus. And that will be the reason or rationale for why the child is lazy, because they'll say the child is capable of attending, focusing. They're just willfully choosing not to. And again, it goes back to the child's difficulty with regulating their attention. The child is able to regulate their attention and focus on the video game because it is stimulating and engaging and is a preferred task. The child is struggling to regulate their attention on a task that is not stimulating. But hyperfocus comes with its own costs. And what you'll have is someone, again, take video gaming, for example. Someone's focusing on video gaming for hours at a time at the cost of doing their homework. And with adults, we'll see this with creatives. They will focus for hours and hours on end on a creative endeavor at the cost of self-care, exercising, doing other things that are not preferred, such as paying bills, or if it's an adult, then it's maybe doing payroll or responding to emails that they don't really want to do. And so hyperfocus, while it can result in an individual being able to produce a ton of work, there's a cost to it because they will then not do other things as well.
What's up, Be Better family? It's Brandon Eastman here. And as a thank you for tuning in to the Be Better broadcast, I want to give you a very special gift. For a limited time, you can get a free digital copy of my book titled Be Extraordinary, Your Guide to Self-Mastery. This book is packed with insights and actionable steps that will help you to unlock your fullest potential in the 5 key areas of your life. But that's not all. Along with the book, I also want to give you the audiobook version absolutely free. Imagine having the power to transform your life right at your fingertips and in your ears anytime, anywhere. Go grab your copy at bebetterindustries.com/book. You'll also find the link in the episode show notes. Go and grab your copy and join me in making a positive impact on the world. Now back to the show. Wow. I just want to say this is absolutely fantastic. You're amazing at what you do, because you're teaching me not only a lot about, the people I care about in my life, because I'm in sales. I feel that ADHD individuals gravitate towards sales a
You
lot of
do.
the time. And, that's, goes along with entrepreneurship and all those things. So I'm around these individuals every day, but almost the way that you're describing it, I feel like this is like, like WebMD back in the day. You can self-diagnose and say, oh, I have these 2 out of 100 things, so I must be this, right? You're having me think, am I ADHD? Like, I grew up with massive impulse control. I would overeat like crazy. I would overspend like crazy. I only learned how to better manage finances and my weight and my body and all these things in my early 20s, which is a big reason why I have the show in the first place. But they haven't gone away completely. I still want to impulse buy. I still want to impulse eat. I have to be very, very, I guess the best word I can think of is strict and conscious with myself in order not to make certain decisions, because I really want to, but I have more awareness now. And maybe that's one of the strategies that we'll get into here, but awareness that when I make this decision, even though I want to, it hurts me in the long run. So it almost makes me feel, am I ADHD? But at the same time, Eran, I've been around people who have been diagnosed from a mental health physician with ADHD, and they are very different than me in the way that they think and the way that they present. I have one friend who was a fellow trainer with me. So we gave many presentations, speaking in large groups of people. And I'm always very able, for the most part, to stay focused and stay on task in situations like that. But this individual he's brilliant. He's a brilliant, like you said, there's many strengths that come along with it, which I want to ask you. But his ability to focus, his ability to think differently, whenever we needed to create a program or do something creative, we would go to him and say, what do you think about this? And he would sit there and literally just stare off for a few minutes and then come up with some brilliant idea. And he's like a secret weapon because of what he claims as his superpower, which is ADHD. But while he was speaking to a room of people, he would often tangent. He'd go off topic. He would go here, he'd go there, which was still valuable in other ways. But so I look at others who are actually diagnosed, and I'm able to see, okay, this probably isn't the case, but I share many tendencies with those individuals. So, okay, so let's talk about when you speak to high schools and colleges. What does that generally look like? So you describe what ADHD is, maybe to help people to better understand themselves, like we've done already. How does one better manage their ADHD? Is it through strategies? Is it through medication? Like, what do you think are the best ways to manage this quote unquote condition?
Sure. So what would appear to most people as the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to managing ADHD would be strategies. And strategies do play a very important role for managing ADHD, but strategies alone are ineffective. And I'll explain to you why. So one of the inherent challenges with ADHD, again, is that self-regulatory process. And if you have an individual who struggles with getting started on things and struggles with follow through, struggles with consistency, if you equip that individual with a compensatory strategy, what leads you to believe that they will actually use it, right? Or that they will use it consistently and over time. So that's, again, why a lot of parents or teachers will accuse a child of being lazy and not caring, because they will provide them with tools and strategies. They'll say, hey, look, here's how you can help yourself. Write things down. Here's a to-do list, set alarms, set reminders. And then the kid doesn't use the strategies. And that is then proof for why the kid just doesn't care or is lazy. So what I have done in my practice, I developed a research-based approach that, and you don't need me or our services. So I'll share with you exactly what it is that we do. I'm like, pull back the curtains and what does this service consist of? So somebody could potentially replicate it in their own lives without having to use a professional. So I developed a 3-pronged approach to helping individuals with ADHD because, again, specifically the strategies only approach just fails. So the first piece, the first pillar of effectively managing ADHD in a non-medicinal way would be through creating structure. So when you said earlier, the reason why I am able to avoid impulse shopping and impulse eating is I'm very strict with myself. But really what you're actually doing is you're introducing structure into your life. And so that is the first pillar, is creating structure. Now, as far as productivity goes, when you create structure, you want to do two primary things. The first is you want to get clarity around what is the task that you want to get done. What exactly is it that needs to be done? And you don't want it to be vague, such as, let's say, buy an office chair. Well, the reason why just saying, some people have on their to-do list, buy an office chair, and it'll stay on their to-do list forever. And it's like, it's so simple. What is the problem? Why am I not buying the office chair? Well, when you actually come to think about it, for many individuals, buying an office chair needs to serve multiple purposes, such as it needs to be ergonomically correct, it needs to have certain features, and yada, yada, yada. And so you want to get clarity around what needs to be done. The second piece around structure is having a deadline. By when will I complete this task? So that's structure, two pieces: clarity around exactly what the task is. Number two, getting a deadline by when the task will be completed. That's the first prong. The second is equipping individuals with strategies. So what are some effective strategies? An effective strategy for enhancing structure is having a start time. So we talked about having a deadline by when to complete the task. A strategy for enhancing structure is a start time. So if you're, for example, going to work on homework, then you might put in your to-do list, which is another strategy, but I will get started doing schoolwork at 3 p.m. Or if you're an adult and you need to do sales calls, then I will start sales calls at 11 a.m. And the reason why it's important to have structure, by the way, is to short circuit the brain's natural pattern of saying, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it later.
Yes.
I'll do it later. You have to short circuit that. And you can't short circuit it or avoid it by willpower or self-discipline. Just so you know, I'm not a fan of willpower and self-discipline when it comes to individuals with ADHD. I'm not a willpower and self-discipline denier or motivation. I'm also not on relying on motivation as well. And some people will be shocked to hear that. Like, what do you mean? But motivation, willpower, and self-discipline are just not reliable. Some days you wake up, you're feeling pumped and motivated. Some days you're not. But you have to meet expectations every day. So we can't rely on things that are unreliable. So you have to short circuit the brain's instinct to say, I'll do it later, and procrastinate. That's where the structure comes in. So that strategy that I mentioned, having start times, is key. Other strategies, for example, to reduce distractions. There's a really cool, inexpensive product called a phone safe. And yes, this device right here is the single most distracting thing known to man. And what a phone safe does, it's like a Tupperware container with a lid that has a locking mechanism in it and a timer. And if you are going to engage in work, school work, professional work, take your phone, put it in the phone safe, set it for however long you wish to not be distracted by your phone, be it several minutes or hours, and put it in there. And the really cool thing about this device is when the brain acknowledges or recognizes that it cannot act on the impulse to check the phone, all of a sudden that impulse just kind of fades and melts away. So very, very cool with that. There's another really cool strategy or a tool that I like called Stay Focused. And Stay Focused is a Chrome extension. Essentially it's an internet restriction software. And I encourage it, for when used with students, is for students to use it on themselves. I discourage parents from enforcing or mandating this tool. But essentially, Stay Focused has a blacklist of websites that are distractions. It could be YouTube, Amazon, whatever. You fill in the blank. You put in your list of distracting websites, and then you might have a whitelist of, and that's their names. Blacklist, whitelist. Those aren't my names. That's theirs. The whitelist would be websites that under no circumstance are inaccessible. You don't want to lock yourself out, for example, from email or whatever other website that you need. And then you set Stay Focused to run in the background for however many minutes you want, 5 minutes or an hour. And then you are restricted from accessing these distracting websites. Wonderful tool. Really one of my favorite strategies is to not work in either your bedroom or for students, and even for many adults, do not work in areas that are comforting.
Yes.
And the reason is, and it's not just for students, it's not just because in their bedrooms they have their game console and other distracting things. A lot of it's just visual cues. When you're in your comfort zone, your brain is sent messages of relax, decompress, chill. These messages are frequently, in counter to doing productive work, especially non-preferred work. So pull yourself from environments that are going to create friction and resistance to getting started. And so that's why I recommend students to not work in their bedroom. Ideally, for college students, go away from your apartment altogether. The library is great. And even the kitchen table is less than ideal. And the reason is because the kitchen, while there are less distractions than one's bedroom, there's still association with eating food.
Yeah.
And food is naturally comforting. And so there is, a tendency to snack, get up, do other things. It's better than a bedroom, but nonetheless, not the most ideal place. Other strategies is breaking down tasks into smaller, easier to manage steps. Frequently, individuals with ADHD, they struggle with breaking things or tasks into easy to manage steps. And so they'll take a look at a project as one single large step. And it's not. And so when you look at something complex and time consuming as a single step, it's easy to get overwhelmed. My suggestion is break that thing down into its constituent parts and then attack it one step at a time. It's a lot less distracting. Again, other strategies, using to-do lists. To-do lists are great, especially for individuals with ADHD who are prone to keeping things in memory. Memory is an issue for keeping track of tasks for a variety of reasons. The first is forgetfulness. The second is when you keep a task in memory, it's very easy to minimize and avoid it. When you write it down, it makes the task a lot more concrete. So to-do lists are great. It's also rewarding to cross that task out when it's done. So to-do lists are great. Calendars are great.
Yeah.
And accountability. So that's, by the way, the third pillar is accountability. If you can have an accountability partner, I recommend not that the parent, if we're talking about kids, the parent to not be the accountability partner. Accountability partners essentially work with the student to identify stumbling blocks, obstacles for getting things completed. And they are intended to provide a non-judgmental environment for working with the student, and otherwise be their cheerleader. So that's the three-pronged approach: create structure, provide the student with strategies, and then provide an accountability partner.
That's powerful. Excellent three-step strategy. And again, this three-step strategy is useful for everybody.
It is.
And I think this is fantastic. Let me tell you, my productivity skyrocketed when I started putting everything in my calendar. Like I'll put obviously every podcast, I'll put my working schedule, I'll put, daycare, I'll put what days I'm going to pay certain bills. It just pops up so that it automatically ingrains a start time in a sense, and in a way, an end time at the same time.
Absolutely.
And again, you described the 3 steps again. Was step 1, create structure, right? Be very clear on the task and the deadline. That's setting goals, right? That's setting SMART goals, time bound, specific, measurable, and attainable goals.
Correct.
Step 2, equip with specific strategies. But again, if you are the caretaker or you're a leader, you can't just say, oh, this is what you need to do. Here's 4 strategies, go and do your thing. Because then if they don't do it, you can't be upset because, and I want to ask you actually a question on that specifically, but step 2 was equip with specific strategies. And then step 3 is accountability. And I think, again, those 3 steps are powerful for everyone, but especially if you are someone diagnosed with ADHD. So let me ask you this, for the teachers who come up to you after the events and they say, Eran, this was amazing. How can I, as a teacher, best support my students with ADHD or those I suspect to have ADHD? What would you say to that person?
So a couple things. One, try and make learning fun. Gamify the instruction by either, if possible, and sometimes this is not possible, but if possible, turn things into a competition, not with other students per se, but within oneself. And that can make the task more interesting and rewarding. Another thing would be to break the instruction into small, easy to manage steps, one of the strategies that I mentioned earlier, and then check for understanding. Do frequent checks for understanding, because your student with ADHD who likely struggles with attention and concentration may have gaps in understanding what you taught them previously, because their mind was wandering. So frequent checking for understanding is very key. The other thing is, be tolerant of mistakes. Be tolerant when your student is underperforming. Understand that while having ADHD is not an excuse for not meeting standards and expectations, nonetheless, we want to be understanding, especially when an individual is engaging in behavior change to try and better themselves and manage their ADHD. We want to extend grace. We want to praise individuals for small wins. Small wins are oftentimes very easy to overlook, but we want to praise small wins and then leverage those small wins into larger wins. Something interesting about praise: there's a tendency for individuals to make judgment praises. For example, such as, I'm so proud of you, or you're so smart. And one would think, like, what's the problem with saying to someone that I'm proud of you or that you're smart? Well, the problem with that is this: if you praise someone when they did something well, and you say, I'm so proud of you, well, kids are very smart. And so they're going to arrive at the conclusion, so the next time I underperform, does that mean you're not going to be proud of me?
It's conditional.
It is conditional.
Yeah.
Or if I don't do well on the next test, does that mean that I'm no longer smart?
Wow.
So I discourage making conditional judgment forms of praise, and instead praise the behavior. So for example, you might say, I'm so proud that you were able to study on multiple days for that exam. I bet that was a challenge, but look at the result. So you're praising the behavior of studying for the test over multiple days. Or I love the way that you were able to overcome your procrastination and start early in your preparation. Look, how do you feel that helped you in this result? So I did 2 things over here. I praised the behavior and I asked a reflective question. So the student arrives at the conclusion that by engaging the behavior of getting, of avoiding their procrastination, they are connecting that with the positive result.
Wow.
So those are, and again, for a lot of people, it's hard to not praise and make a judgment on the person, because I want you to know I'm proud of you. I want you to know I think you're smart, But you got to understand the flip side of that. When that kid is going to underperform, and they will at some point, they're going to think, well, then I'm not smart.
Yes. Another powerful example of how what you're saying might not actually be delivering the intended result, even if it's subconscious. But I'm going to take that because I am guilty of just saying, I'm really proud of you, right? Versus I'm proud of you for this specific behavior. And you mentioned the reflective question. What would the reflective question generally be? Would it be something about, how did that impact the result that you got? What's the reflective question?
Sure. So it's very interesting. So individuals with ADHD, one of the features of the condition, again, I said it's very complex. It's a lot more than just inattention and impulse control or hyperactivity. So individuals with ADHD struggle with self-monitoring. They're living in the moment. They don't often reflect on their behaviors and the consequences of their behaviors. So oftentimes consequences or outcomes are born from actions that you took, or consequences or outcomes are born from inactions that did not take place. So I love asking reflective questions. The purpose of reflective questions is to create awareness. And so a form of reflective question largely targets a connection between, what is it that you did that helped? Or what is it that you did that did not help? Ways of asking. So for example, if a student had a positive result on a test, so I might ask, Brandon, what is it that you did that resulted in this positive grade? We'll unpack that. I might ask you other ways of reflecting by saying, if you could give your future self advice on how to prepare for other exams, what would that advice be?
Wow.
Or if you, could, let's say you had not a positive result. I might say something like, Brandon, this is not a crying over spilled milk situation, but if you could go back to last week, what advice would you give your former self so as to have a different outcome? And I'm asking you to reflect upon that. I'm not telling you what you should do. I'm asking you to come up with the solution. And that is something that is frequently missing from the mindset and approach of individuals with ADHD. And it needs to be done explicitly by an outside person. I don't say needs to be, but it's very helpful when it's done from an outside person, because the individual with ADHD is likely not engaging in that self-reflective process on their own.
Yes. This is brilliant. I mean, we've dove into what is ADHD, right? Is it everybody? Is it a small subsect of people? That is something that is different, right? We discuss strategies to master it, not overcome it, but master it and learn to use it and learn to manage it and live with it, right? Because it's not something that goes away. It's something we simply better manage.
That is correct.
We discussed a lot, brother, and I appreciate you diving into all these. We went longer than we talked initially because this is amazing. And I think if there was one resource that someone could tune into and the person who's curious, who wants to better understand themselves, who has ADHD, I think this conversation is the conversation. That might be my ego talking. I don't know, but I just know that I've learned a lot from you, more than I've ever understood on the topic. And I greatly appreciate it. So let me ask you, so we mentioned that you speak with high schools to help the students. You also speak with colleges to help the students.
Correct.
So where can people reach out to you in order to start a conversation, to have you come to their school? Do you do it in person? Do you do it virtually? What does it look like to work with you?
Sure. So first of all, I love speaking either at parent groups, universities, high schools. I love to share information because ultimately it's about making an impact. I love making an impact in the lives of individuals who are otherwise oftentimes feeling like there is something wrong with them. There are it is very, very common for individuals with ADHD to suffer from limiting beliefs, feelings of inadequacy and low self-esteem and low belief in themselves, because that's just been ingrained in them by society throughout their lives. So the way to reach me, one way is through my website, GraysonExecutiveLearning.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Grayson Executive Learning. And that would be one way. Those are different ways to get a hold of me. My practice provides academic and ADHD coaching to high school and college students. The majority of our students have either ADHD or executive function deficits. And we really specialize in helping students learn to successfully manage deadlines and excel in school. I developed a research-based approach, the one that I mentioned earlier, that's comprised of those three pillars: structure, accountability, and strategies. The approach is entirely based on evidence-based interventions. We take our work incredibly seriously because we have the opportunity and privilege to truly change and improve lives. And dude, man, I almost get emotional talking about it, because it is that powerful. You take a human being who all too often has been beaten down emotionally and mentally, and you reveal to this individual that there is another way. And that other way is not through wishful, motive. You got to try harder. You got to be better. You got to give more effort. It's not that. It's about equipping someone with tangible, concrete tools and laying out for them a blueprint that if they follow and walk through that blueprint, that journey, they will, not that they may, but that they will achieve positive outcomes. And when they go through that, the impact, not just on outcomes, but in belief in themselves, is amazing. Ultimately, we want to work ourselves out of a job. So we help individuals develop sustainable long-term behavior change. So ultimately, the individual no longer needs us. They've developed new habits, new routines, new mindsets that they're able to carry throughout the rest of their life. That's what we're here to do.
Yeah, you're helping people to better understand their user manual.
Yes.
Right? And if you better understand your user manual, what does the difference? I mean, just think about the difference in the quality of life one is able to live when they better understand themselves, when they understand, because as a 15-year-old, 16, 17, even 20s and beyond for some people, you think something's wrong with you, right?
Totally.
Especially if you've never been diagnosed, but you think I'm different than Susie, I'm different than Joe. If it truly is 2.5% of children, I mean, that's 2 out of 100 people. That's not that many people who legit are diagnosed with ADHD. But I went to a high school with 1,500 students. That's about 50 students who are ADHD. Guarantee maybe 3 to 5 of them have actually been diagnosed with it. Right. And who knows if that's been taken in the right direction, whether medication or whatever. But think about, this is so important. Like every teacher, every superintendent listening right now, every decision maker who can bring Eran into your school and bring this education to the forefront, it's your duty to do so, because you've got 50 students in a school of 1,500 who don't understand themselves the way that they could. And think about the impact they can make, not only on their schoolwork and in their career, but in their life in general, when they better understand themselves, learn what ADHD is, learn these 3 strategies, and it'll get them excited to live. It'll get them excited that they are different. Neurodiversity can be an exciting thing because you are different. You look at things differently versus the neurotypical person. That's kind of boring being neurotypical.
It
right?
can be.
But, no, I don't mean that in a bad way to anyone listening. They might be like, what are you saying? Right. But this is very, very important information, Eran. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show.
Sure.
All your information's in the show notes. So guys, go check out Eran's website. I'm going to have his LinkedIn profile down there as well, and his other social medias. Go check him out there. Start a conversation with him. And listen, brother, I'm really, really grateful. I met Janine because she introduced me to you. And damn, you guys are a power couple, man. Like,
thank you.
your topics feed on each other, but
You do.
it's got to be such an awesome dynamic between just the two of you. So it's really cool to have met both of you now and to see what you're all about. And thank you for bringing value to our people tuning in, brother. Thank you. And for bringing value to the world, because that's really what you're doing.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come on your show. I love your work. I love your message. It's very consistent with my value system and what we do in the practice as well. You're doing a service by putting your message out into the universe. So thank you.
Thank you, brother. What an awesome conversation to dive into the intricacies of ADHD, to debunk some of the myths, to talk about what it really is and how you can master it, how you can manage it. And if you don't have ADHD or you don't suspect that you do, so that you can better understand the people in your life who do, because it's very likely based on the stats that you do have someone in your life who is neurodiverse. And if you better understand them, you can better help them, but not even just help them, but just better create a better relationship between, because it's not your duty to help them, right? They might already know these strategies, or they're on their own journey, they're on their own path where they'll discover these things. But Eran really laid out the blueprint to master your ADHD. And like we said in the title, the truth about it, because I learned a lot that I didn't know. And I hope it was the same for you too. Be sure to check out the show notes. Check out Eran's website. If you're anyone related to working in a school or anything like that, get Eran into your school, right? Bring him in. You're going to help so many kids who will remember that presentation, who will remember that conversation for probably the rest of their lives. Make a positive difference in that way. If you're a decision maker, then it's your duty to bring them in. Links are in the description to check that out. And thank you for tuning in. Be sure to share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. If you found this helpful, I'm sure that they will too. Thank you for being the best part of the Be Better team. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.